Do you ever feel stuck? The alarm goes off and you think, is this really my life? Do you wish you could douse your relationships or your career or even your business with rocket fuel and throw a match on it? End the blah once and for all. They either launch or they burn up and you get to start over. I've been there and I see you. I'm Ben Walters, an entrepreneur, pastor, coach, and consultant. If you're ready to get unstuck and ignite your super pumped life or business, I'll give you the rocket fuel and the match. All you have to do is light it. At SuperPumped, we want all of our listeners, all of our clients, all of our guests to be number one. But the sad reality is a lot of our guests and a lot of our listeners are number two. A lot of them are in number two positions within their organizations. In other words, they're in the top of the leadership, but they're not the top dog within their leadership. And for many of you, that makes you feel number two about your job. And so I wanted to begin to offer some free executive coaching on how you should be thinking about number two positions or top leadership positions in organizations as you consider your current position, or maybe you're considering a job offer or positions you want to go after if you're not happy where you are. And so we're going to dive into that today. And part of why this came up was because I take my dogs on a walk every day through a certain section of my neighborhood, and it is a high-end part of the neighborhood. It is a part of the neighborhood where all the homes are over $1 million. They all look out with this fantastic view of the Ohio River. And I wonder about some of the people behind those doors, because it's not Cincinnati's top neighborhood. So it's most likely not the neighborhood where the CEOs and the very top dog live. But they're high enough priced that they are houses where people who are very high up are in those organizations and behind those doors living. And there really is kind of a vice pressure. Whenever you're a VP of something in your organization, you're a senior executive, whatever, or you're a chief technology officer or chief information officer, or chief operating officer, or whatever any of those second in command type positions is, there is a lot of pressure organizationally on you. And so you feel squeezed all the time, right? I call it the vice. It's just pressure from above, pressure from below. And then on top of the professional pressure that these individuals feel, there's also personal pressure to maintain that home, pressure to maintain the lifestyle, pressure to maintain the cars and all the things. And so as I walk this part of the neighborhood, I like to think about some of those neighbors that live there. And one particular neighbor I know a little bit about, and I know a little bit about his position, but he's in a vice position. And for the sake of this podcast, we're going to call him JD. And so what I know about JD is he has a beautiful house. It's up on a hill. It's $1 million home. I know he has a couple of kids. Those kids are in private school. He's got a high pressure job where he is just getting beat around from all sides. And so today I wanted to offer, what advice would I give JD as he explores his current career and his current position and then where he's headed in life. So if you're in one of those high leadership positions, I want you to kind of pull back to the 35,000 foot level today and look down on what you're in. And the first thing you need to look at is your organization. And you need to decide, is this organization and the mission of this organization doing things that I'm aligned with? So let's say an organization wants you to figure out how to sell flavored vapes to kids. For me, that would be a non-starter. That would probably be a no-go. Or let's say you need to be a pharmaceutical rep for a drug that you think pretty likely is going to get people addicted to it and kind of ravage their lives. Well, again, organizationally, not a great thing. So you need to begin thinking about that. And in the case of my neighbor JD up on the hill, JD is in a incredibly well-known, storied organization as a vice president level. And this organization at times has been that shining light, that city on the hill. But there have been other times in this organization's history where the organization has literally trampled on the rights of its constituents and not treated people right. And it has some shame within some of the ways it operated systemically and how it oppressed people. And so there's kind of a mixed bag organizationally, but I believe that at its core, there are good people within this organization. And so there would be some appeal to do that. Now, you also have to look at the organization and kind of its recent history, not just its history, 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 300 years ago or 50, but what about the last decade or two? And in this particular organization, they're all over the place. It seems like every 4 or 8 years, they're running this way, then they're running that way, then they're running this way, then that way, this way, that way. So it's a little bit all over the place and doesn't seem to have a clear direction and certainly doesn't seem unified. It seems like an organization where the rank and file are really divided and really kind of a lot of infighting. So that's a tough situation. So first thing, really look at the organization you're going into and evaluate how that aligns with who you are and what your skill set is. But the second thing is, and this is equally important, is who is your boss? In JD's case, and you want to look at two things with your boss. You want to look at the personality and you want to look at their program. So in JD's case, if you look at the program, you say, well, this boss has a very bold, ambitious program. They're an innovator. They're going to ruffle a lot of feathers. They are not somebody who is maintaining the status quo. They are ripping things up, changing things. And so if that isn't a fit with your personality, if you're more of a maintainer, let's say, that probably isn't the right boss for you. You've really got to look at what's their program and then where's that program headed? And is that something that you can get behind or is it a non-starter like it would be with the addictive drugs or the vapes for children? So you've got to decide that. You've really got to know where that program is going and what that person is doing. The second thing though is personality. And this is a key one. If you are in the number 2 position, your life is largely dictated by that number 1. And I know family members where here they are, like JD, where they've got young kids and they're trying to maintain just a semblance of balance. And that's hard when you're in those top level executive positions. But this boss would just text and expect things at all hours of the night, email at midnight, and hey, let's jump on a call at 5 a.m. And, you really don't need to take vacation for a week. Why don't you take a night and then let's get back to it? Or I know you're on vacation, but let's sit down and work on this presentation. And so it begins to encroach. Just their whole work style and their personality isn't a fit, isn't aligned with who you are trying to be as a father or a spouse and that kind of thing. So you've really got to look at your boss in that regard too, not just their program, whether you align with that, but also do your personalities mesh? And that's a key thing because sometimes it can be a great organization, a great program, but you two just don't quite click. And so you've got to recognize that as a major pitfall. So that's the second thing is organization, then your boss. Third thing, and this is also critical, is what is your role? And you want that role to be well defined. You don't want it to be ambiguous. You don't want it to be one thing one day and another thing another day. And that's a tricky thing, I think, for JD is to figure out with his boss, what is his role? And traditionally in this organization, the role has varied. So there have been some in his role that have taken on projects and done a lot of good things. And there's others in that same position at different times that have done very little, that have been more just show up to a couple of things, smile. And so you have to figure out what is your role. And then within that role, do you have autonomy? Do you have the ability to do that job without your boss either undoing what you do or micromanaging what you do? Because those things can just sap the soul. My daughter's in a number 2 position, and for her, it's a really number 2 position. She absolutely hates it. And one of the reasons she hates it is because she tries to work on projects and things that need done within the organization. And then the boss comes behind her and undoes it and changes it around. And she thinks, why did I even bother? Or she's working with the people below her and maybe there's a conflict or something and they just go right over her head to the boss and the boss sides down the line and they don't have her back. And so that role of autonomy, it just can kind of eat at you. You think, what am I doing here? I'm wasting my time. Nobody wants to feel like they're wasting their time. The other piece is that work meaningful? Because some bosses will just give you busy work and it's busy work. You think, this isn't meaningful. Give me something real that I can sink my teeth into, that I can take my greatest gifts and my incredible passions and create something. If they're not willing to give you that, that's something to think about probably not a super pumped role for you. So that is not a good thing right there. Fourth thing you need to consider is pathway to promotion. Nobody wants to be number two forever. Let's be honest. If you've climbed the ladder all the way to number two in your organization, and that could be assistant manager of a hotel, that could be assistant manager of a restaurant, that could be team lead, whatever that role is. It doesn't have to be a high executive level. If you've gotten to that level, you want to get to that top chair. You want to be the one who's calling the shots, who's setting the overall direction. You're not content to be number two. Nobody wants to stay as a number two and continue to get squeezed out like a number two. No good. So what is your pathway to promotion? And in JD's case, it's a situation where some of the people in his position have made it on up to the top chair while a lot more have not. And so this may or may not be the pathway for him to get to the top. And we're going to talk in a secondary episode, a part two of this whole idea of being the number two is how do you position yourself? If you decide that organizationally you're aligned with that, how do you get yourself to the top? So anyway, know that there's a pathway to promotion. Otherwise, you're just ramming your head against the ceiling and you're going to lose your mind on that. And then the fifth thing is your compensation. Now that's not only your pay, but are there special perks? And in JD's case, the pay isn't very good in his vice job. It's just not compared to the education, the experience he has. He could make way more at other places. But the perks are actually really good. He's got a great pension, got a great healthcare system. He's got access to these incredible planes that have the latest, greatest technology, gets to travel the world and see things and be kind of in situations that a lot of us would dream of. So the perks in that job are huge. So he's got a way, okay, the compensation isn't quite as much as he should be paid or could be paid, but man, those perks are kind of once in a lifetime types of perks. And so these are all the things that you have to weigh. Now, I want you to notice something because I think a lot of you get this completely flipped over and inverted backwards. We talked about compensation dead last. Yet what I see out of so many of my clients and why I see miserable clients who come to me and say, man, I hate my job. And the first thing they say is, I'm really paid well. I'm paid great money, but I hate my job. And then we begin to unpack it. Okay, the money isn't the most important thing to you, is it? And then they begin to tell me about how dysfunctional their organization is or how their organization is doing things they don't agree with, that maybe their moral compass says, that's not who I am. That's not what I believe in. And so, you start unpacking that, or they tell you, my boss is absolutely awful to work for, or he's an awful human being. And I don't know how I do it. I can't stand the person. And so that undermines that joy and it begins to just not feel good. And then depending on your role, sometimes you're just all over the place. You don't really have any power. You can't make a difference. We want to make a difference. We don't want to waste a day, a minute, an hour doing stuff that doesn't matter. All of us want meaningful, matters lives. So I say all this to say, you've got to begin to think about all of these things, or you're number two, you're going to continue to feel number two about your number two position. So wherever you're at, if you're an assistant, if you're a vice, if you're a senior blank, think about this. Think about your organization. Think about your boss and both their personality and their program. Think hard about your role and what they've given you and what they haven't given you. Think about whether you have a pathway to promotion, either within that organization, or maybe you can parlay that into a promotion to the top chair in a different organization. And then lastly, very last, think about that compensation. And if you do that, you're going to be on your way to a super pumped life. And if you want help unpacking any of these things, if you're in a position where you're weighing this, but you're just not quite sure, we can dive much deeper into all 5 of those things to help you get on track to your super pumped life and stop feeling number two about your number two position. Thanks for joining me today on the Super Pumped podcast. If you enjoyed today's show as much as I did, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app and tell your friends about the show so others can find and benefit from the Super Pumped community. And finally, to put the ideas from today's show into action, visit us at superpumped.com to view the show notes, book a complimentary consultation, or take our free business launch readiness assessment. Keep well, and I'll see you next time.